Okay, this is Stephen Violi with the Psychology Webinar Group. We are here tonight to talk about the topic of sexual abuse and the impact on children and adolescents. Now, this is quite it's a topic that can be very messy if you don't know how to deal with it. So we've got a specialist here tonight. His name's Kevin O'Brien. But first, we'll just we'll talk a little bit about us. I'm Stephen. My background is a farmer, and I have got I've been living in rural New South Wales for a while with depression myself. So I've had a bit of a passion to bring this training to the rural and regional parts of Australia. And this is our second webinar. And next week we have another lady coming along, Leona Dawson, who will be talking about focusing, and has got a master's degree in counselling. So we have a fair few specialists lined up that are here to talk to you. Now, tonight's guest is Kevin O'Brien. He was actually with us last week as well, and we got some really positive feedback. And we thought we'd get him back again this week to talk about sexual abuse. So I'll hand it over to you, Kevin.
No worries, thanks.
And you might see a little flicker on your screen, everyone, but it's all good.
All right.
Over to you, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everybody, and thanks for coming today. I'm just waiting for my little machine to do its thing. Here we go. So I just want to welcome you today. So we're going to be talking about sexual abuse. Today is really just about an awareness. So if you're already working in the field, like in pastoral care, youth work, or maybe even in counselling, this will probably help you inform your practice. And if you're a student, this will give you a little bit of a taste of what's involved when working with sexual abuse, or maybe any other kinds of abuse. And I think the first point is to draw to that any abuse is trauma-based. So when children experience trauma, they actually process it a little bit differently than adults do, and it's usually because of where they are developmentally. So if an adult experienced, say a 30-year-old experienced a car accident or something, they might be able to process that information differently as to, say, a 6-year-old or 12-year-old. And we'll sort of explore that, we'll unpack that. And my goal today is just simply to create an awareness of you how trauma-based experiences impact on children. And therefore, when we work with them, they might not do what we're sort of hoping that they would do. And it just hopefully I'll create enough awareness in this lecture just to give you the insights, just to go, you know what, I understand where this young person's coming from, or I understand why this child is behaving the way they're behaving. And so hopefully it'll give you the knowledge, some skills, some awareness. So you'll go away feeling maybe a little bit more confident, or maybe it will just spin you onto, hey, I need to go and do some more professional development in this area, and find out in your zones, wherever you are in Australia, that you can just go, yep, these people are offering it, and it'll be fantastic. All right, so if we just go through. This is me. Hi, this pretty fella right there in front of you. So there's my mobile phone number, but I'm Western Australian based, so ringing me in Western Australia might not be all that helpful, but you can email me some questions, and there's my Facebook. If you go on my Facebook page, check it out and like it. A bigger profile online. All right, so we are looking at development, and it just simply, I think if we all study or we work in the field, we sort of understand that babies to toddlers, toddlers to children, children to tweens, to teenagers, to young adults, adults to senior citizens is just a natural part of life. And this little picture here, the stages of healthy adolescent development, just shows a lot around physical grades here, because, you know, in ideal world, this is sort of like what healthy process here normal children experience. Now, if you throw any sort of changes the dynamics here. So when we look at physical growth, if the kids experience trauma, say at around 8, it actually may delay development. You know, it may actually delay intellectual cognition development. You know, sense of autonomy, their attachments might be a little bit distorted, and independence might be a real struggle. I don't know why that's there. I don't stand.
Brian, can you hear me? Kevin, sorry. Can you hear me? Okay, looks like Kevin must have cut out there for a little bit. If we can all hold on for just a couple of minutes, he should be able to get back on. Might have, when that little prompt come up, it might have paused his computer for a couple of minutes. So what I might do until he comes back on is just quickly talk a little bit about where we came from and what got us on this journey of delivering education to psychologists, counsellors, and students in especially in the rural and regional areas, was just the lack of resources that there are for education and the expense that it takes to get to the city areas. A couple of you are probably from the city, as I know a few of you have been coming through as students at an existing university, so that's really good. That means that we're satisfying some need. We will also have 15 minutes of Q&A towards the end, if any of you have questions. Now, I'm not sure what has gone on with Kevin's computer, but he will be back online soon. We've done a fair few tests, and I don't know what happened this time, but it's all good. He'll be back, and we're recording it all, so you'll all be able to get the recording. We'll put that up on our Facebook page as we encode it and put it online. That'll be available for everyone to see, and we will try and rip the audio out and put it into a podcast as well.
Hello, can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Yes, you're back.
I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. For some reason,
That's all right.
I just lost internet.
I kept them occupied.
Shall we continue?
Yeah, we can. Absolutely. We've still got your screen. Okay. There we go. We're back.
Sorry, guys. It's just one of those things with modern technology. So I just put the adolescent development sequence in there just to give you a guide, an understanding that this is healthy, and then you can actually shadow in impacts of trauma behind these developments, such as, like I mentioned earlier, that trauma can affect physical development through puberty. So impacts of sexual abuse on child and adolescent development. So attachment problems is the first key, and that's the key with babies and young infants exposed to abuse and neglect are more likely to experience insecure or disorganized attachment problems with their primary caregiver. Patterns of child attachment are extremely important for early emotional and social development. So it sort of explains that first 3 years or the first 5 years of a baby's life or a toddler's life is the most important, because it learns about security, foundation, attachment, and all that sort of stuff. So if you're a student or you work in the field, this is probably a little bit of a reminder than anything. And so what's really important in those 5 years is that it's probably the first time this rapid development occurs, learning to talk, learning to think, learning to walk, learning to know who's safe and who's not safe, feel confident to explore, feel confident to attach, feel confident to be a part of this dynamic. When things aren't well and things are being impeded either through alcohol and drug abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, these attachments don't become so strong. In fact, the toddler develops a lot of hesitancy, and it goes into a survival mode, and maybe there's a delay or a lack of development in key areas around cognition and motor skills and things like that. Patterns of child caregiver attachment are extremely important for the child's early emotional and social development. For the children with insecure attachment, parents and caregivers who should be the source of safety and protection become the source of danger and harm, leaving irresolvable conflict. So there's, if the person who's been abused as a baby and toddler might not recall a vivid memory, but there is still these strong feelings of a sense of impending doom or danger or high level of anxiety and unexplained depression and all these sort of things. So it all goes hand in hand. Without the security and the support of a primary caregiver, babies and infants may find it difficult to trust others when in distress, which may lead to persistent experience of anxiety or anger. And so this is also reflective in adolescence. So if it happens in early childhood, there's a chance that when in distress, it might mean that they might not go looking for help in adults, because adults in the past and their experiences have been really quite untrustworthy and not really okay to deal with. So the young person will then turn to their peers, or the young person might actually turn to resolve the issue with themselves. And because of the painfulness of anxiety or the painfulness of anger, they might lean to dissociative measures like drugs and alcohol, which it subdues these anxieties, or it sort of brings about a false sense of peace within the person. So attachment's an older normal development process for children, which can severely impede child's ability to communicate and form healthy relationships with other people. I've got this thing in my way here. I'm just going to try and move that out of the way. Here we go. Interact with other and form healthy relationships. So this whole attachment, this whole sense of security, this whole sense of being, when a baby or a toddler is being interfered with or abused or whatever's happening at the time, actually distorts and damages any sense of I want to connect with people. It actually becomes really unhealthy. Yeah. So research investigating the effects of child abuse and neglect has overall physical health, has largely focused on outcomes in adulthood. However, data from the longitude studies of child abuse and neglect in the United States has indicated strong association between abuse, neglect, and health problems in children and adolescents. Flaherty found that exposure to one adverse experience doubled the odds of children having overall poor physical health at the age of 6, and tripled them if children have experienced 4 or more adverse experiences. So with trauma comes acute stress, and the stress of it all, the stress of that sort of stuff impacts on the immune system. And so the stress actually damages the immune system, so they're more susceptible to get more flu-like symptoms, more ailments like diarrhea, and linked highly to anxiety, those sort of things. So we need to do trauma equals stress, stress equals lower immune system means more exposure to sickness, and so there's less ability to fight that. So it's a double whammy for the kid. And the kid's not only got poor attachment going on with the parents, but then they have to deal with the stress and be constantly sick, which could lead to a lot of missing out on school. A further study by Hersey, Chang, and Koch found that all types of abuse and neglect were associated with 8 out of 10 major adolescent health risks. A common form of abuse affecting the health of babies is shaken baby syndrome. Health problems resulting from shaky baby syndrome may include brain damage, spinal cord injuries, hearing loss, speech difficulties, and even death. So I'm not actually going to be talking about that, but that's just one example of how one act of abuse can lead to all sorts of serious health issues within a baby, or a toddler, or a young child. Trauma caused by experiences of child abuse and neglect can have serious effects on developing the brain, increasing the risk of psychological problems. Extensive research has identified a strong relationship between abuse, neglect, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Recent research suggests that diagnosing children with post-traumatic stress disorder does not capture the full developmental effects of chronic child abuse and neglect, and many researchers now prefer the term complex trauma. Exposure to complex and chronic trauma can result in persistent psychological problems. Complex trauma affects the developing brain and may interfere with the child's capacity to integrate sensory, emotional, and cognitive information, which may lead to overreactive responses to subsequent stress. So, in boys, it might be the extreme anger response. For a girl, it might be an extreme emotional response and withdrawal. So there's those sort of impacts. Yeah. You can still hear me okay? Steve, can you still hear me okay?
Absolutely, Kevin.
Okay, just
Sorry, I
checking.
was just muted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's right. Cool, thanks. Strong association has been made with child abuse and neglect, learning difficulties, and poor academic achievement. So that's a really important point. So if you're taking notes, you might want to just underline that, because when you're dealing with tweens and adolescent children, if there's a real sense that they're not wanting or willing or unable to engage in learning in school, and it's a real problem, then it probably means that they're more focused on what's happened for them. They're really stressed out, and you need to find strategies that will help them to manage the stress levels, because you can't take the memories or the event away. That's probably a little bit beyond us. But what we can do is teach techniques around how to effectively manage these stressful things, so they can actually realign themselves to actually start learning the learning process. Abuse and neglect in the early years of life can seriously affect the development capacities of infants, especially in the critical areas of speech and language. So you can understand why it's important to focus on this area for a little bit, because what happens in childhood has a real significant impact on adolescent and young adult and adult life, and how we then respond to life and how we respond to relationships, how some relationships can be really successful in later life, and how some just seem to be self-destructive and not very healthy at all. Research has demonstrated that abused and neglected children perform less well on standardized tests and achieve poorer school marks, even when socioeconomic status and other background factors are taken into account. Prospective research studies have consistently shown that malnutrited children have lower educational achievements than other groups of children. In a meta-analysis by Veltman and Brown, studies at 91% indicated that abuse and neglect was related to poor school achievement. 36 of 42 indicated delays in language development. However, the authors acknowledge that studies associating child abuse and neglect with learning problems are problematic, in that most studies do not know the intellectual status of children before maltreatment. So that's just a little bit of a caveat over the research, which we can't take it wholly, but it's a good indicator that if we have a struggling student, there might be more going on, or the adolescent's not engaging in certain things. It just might simply mean there's certain areas in their life that's not fully developed yet. So we need to take that into consideration, especially if we're doing counselling or youth work or pastoral care work in school contexts or other contexts, like crisis accommodation or hostels or whatever. We need to take this into consideration working with these children. They're not going to be on the same page as healthy, children without that experience. In a meta-analysis by Veltman and Brown, I think that's a double up, sorry. So researchers have found that child abuse and neglect is associated with behaviour problems in childhood and adolescence. The earlier children have maltreated, the more likely they are to develop behavioural problems in adolescence. Research have often associated abuse and neglect with internalising behaviours being withdrawn, sad, isolated and depressed, and externalising behaviour being aggressive and hyperactive through childhood. Internalising behaviours are commonly associated with child neglect. So, there's the normal sort of parameters of children being a bit naughty and maybe a bit weird, and then there's normal parameters for adolescents acting out and trying to find themselves and all that sort of stuff. But then outside of those parameters are these sort of factors, being aggressive or hyperactive. Are we going to quickly label that kid ADHD, or is there something more going on for this child that we need to investigate and understand and all that sort of stuff? So it's just awareness that we're aiming for here. We're not trying to find child abuse under rocks and all that sort of stuff. We're just going for awareness. If you're working with a young person that doesn't quite seem to fit what we're trying to do, then maybe there's something else that we just need to probably be exploring gently with all sense of ethics and right approaches. Children affected by neglect tend to be more isolated at school compared to other groups of children, having difficulty making friends. Again, it's that sense of broken attachment. So forming friendships is a very risky business for abused children. Neglected children may also display aggressive and disruptive behaviour. That can be also interpreted as a defensive mechanism, a deflecting mechanism, trying to deal with stuff. However, externalising behaviour problems are more closely associated with physical and sexual abuse or witnessing domestic violence. Inappropriate sexualised behaviour is also linked with abuse and neglect, and most commonly with sexual abuse and exposed to highly violent and sexualised environments. So, there's normal sexual parameters with children growing up, like I'm a boy or a girl, but when that exceeds normal parameters, like mutual masturbation or things like that, then that's not really quite appropriate for maybe an 8-year-old. That's probably more appropriate for a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, because that's the development sequence. But when an 8-year-old's exposed to that behaviour, then that's something that we probably need to be aware of, that might not be normal, that might be a little bit outside of the development parameters that we need to take into consideration. Mental health problems such as depression and anxiety disorders have consistently been linked with child abuse and neglect, particularly for adolescents. Prevalent rates of major depression have been shown to be approximately 4 times higher in adolescents than young children. In a review of 7 large-scale studies by Harkness and Lumley, all studies showed high association between child abuse and neglect and depression in adolescents. So that also manifests in concepts like self-harm and this numbing out, and so cutting to remind themselves they're alive, seeing that they're alive, the cuttings and the dissociation from the emotional pain, those sort of things. Attempted suicide, drug use, all that sort of stuff is masking or disassociating from the issue that they've been dealing with, and they feel they've got no parameters or trusting relationships to go, hey, this is happening for me. For example, in a longitudinal study by Brown, Cohen, Johnson, and Smales, children and adolescents who reported a history of abuse or neglect were 3 times more likely to exhibit depressive disorders than non-maltreated children. In a Victorian study of characteristics of children referred to therapeutic health services for children who have been abused or neglected, Take 2 program, 62% of the children met the criteria for at least one mental health diagnosis. So it's an alarming statistic, but it's the ongoing effect. So the abuse has happened, but then there seems to be this ripple ongoing effect, affects attachment, affects relationship, affects these learning and cognitive and behavioural things, and then ongoing, and it creates an anxiety and behavioural issues for adolescents, and they take that on into adult life if not treated well, if they make adult life. Put that in there. So youth suicide. Research suggests that abuse and neglect doubles the risk of attempted suicide for young people. So again, if we're talking about awareness, this is like the big one. This is like huge in consideration of the suicide statistics in Australia. And so and the risk young people are experiencing. So when we put all this in a cocktail of stuff and we shake it up, in that cocktail, then we sort of got a very vulnerable young person. So when someone flippantly says, yeah, I've been abused, it's a little red flag should go up, or if they're displaying certain behaviours, little red flag should go up, and a further investigation. So if you're not a psychologist or you're not trained in this particular area, but you've done this training and you think, well, this is an awareness, well, hang on, it doesn't hurt to go, maybe I need to talk to someone and maybe I need to make the referral. Rather be doing that than not doing it at all, because it's about the young person. It's not about how we feel. If we feel a bit professionally stupid for making a referral because little Johnny's acting out, it's much better that way than to ignore Johnny's little behaviour problem, and later on we find out down the track that Johnny's actually committed suicide. So this awareness is going out. If you're working with an adolescent coming from this background, be mindful, little red flag, okay, we need to be paying vigilant attention to what's going on. The systematic review by Evans and colleagues found a strong link between physical and sexual abuse and attempted suicide and suicidal thoughts occurring during adolescence. Perkins and Jones found that 31% of physical abuse group of adolescents had suicidal thoughts compared to 10% of non-abuse groups. So again, young people experiencing abuse often will find things very, very difficult, and that is considered a valid option for them. Might not be what we would consider right, but that's their space, that's their world, that's what they're thinking, and they really are in crisis, and they really need someone to come along and help as much as we can. Brodsky and Stanley, 2008, found that the risk of repeated suicide attempts are 8 times greater for youths with sexual abuse history. The author suggested that sexual abuse could be specifically related to suicide behaviour because it's closely associated with the feelings of shame and internal attribution to blame. So that's what they carry, and we've got to understand that. It's not, we can't really work with anything else but the shame and blame that they carry. Our practice, our approach needs to be able to create a space where they can explore the shame and blame and deal with it in a way that's going to be safe and secure for them. So maybe safety and security is what we need to address first before we go straight into sexual abuse stories. Eating disorders, including anorexia and binge purge behaviour, bulimia, may also be associated with child sexual abuse and neglect. So there's some associations, not all the time. There's some links there. Sexual abuse has been widely linked to eating disorders in children, and adolescents, however, experiencing other maltreatment types or multiple forms of abuse and neglect have also shown to increase the risk of developing an eating disorder. And again, I'm not an expert on eating disorders by any imagination, but I get a sense that it's got a lot to do with image. If I look this particular way, then maybe it will stop and all that sort of stuff. The psychological effects of child abuse and neglect may lead to alcohol and drug abuse problems in adolescence and adulthood. So if you've got a young person who's just on the go all the time and just speeding or using a whole lot of cannabis or binge drinking quite a lot every weekend or every day, there's a chance there that there's some damage done prior, and they're using this methodology to try and mask a lot of pain they're going through. And so maybe it's more about, for us, when they do talk to us about their drug use, maybe it's about dealing with the drug use and make sure when we do that we create a place that, one, that we adhere to the ethics of confidentiality, that we stay strictly to that process, and secondly, that they understand that process and how safe and secure that process can be, often with limits. We know there's limits to that, and they need to know the limits to that as well. And I think open transparency creates a sense of, process of trust. We're being open and honest with you. That's role modeling design behavior. Look, this is what we do in relationships. We display this level of trust. So maybe then it's about you reciprocating in a way, not necessarily straight away, but maybe over a period of time, a journey of long, if you've got the capacity to do this, over a long period of time, maybe that journey of trust can be developed. Then we can start dealing with the deeper stuff. Yeah. I'm just so used to a live audience, like lecturing in front of people, not necessarily the computer, but hopefully I'm getting across okay.
You're right, they're all taking attention, I can see.
Good to know. Evidence suggests that all types of child maltreatment are significantly related to high levels of substance use, tobacco, alcohol, and illicit drugs. In a surveying public school students grades 6, 9, and 12 in the United States, Harrison and colleagues found that experience of physical or sexual abuse increased the likelihood of students using alcohol, marijuana, and other drugs. And for me, that's a bit of a duh moment, but that's a given, I think. I mean, if I experience some strong emotional pain or some difficult moment, or stressful day, I go and get a beer, and I just drink a beer and that feels good. It makes me forget what I've gone through the day. These kids carry that 24/7, so it makes sense to me that they'll go and do a couple of bongs and buy an ounce of weed and smoke it over a weekend, or go and get a bottle of bourbon and drink it in a matter of an hour or so, just to completely wipe themselves out. Because that pain would be like incredibly difficult, and I think it's really hard to describe what they're carrying because it's so unique and it's such an individual thing. So where was I? A further study in the United States found that 28% of physical abused adolescents use drugs, compared to 14% of non-abused adolescents, compared to 22% of the non-abused group. 36% of physically abused adolescents also had high levels of alcohol use. So that takes into consideration cultural norms, like we're a drinking society, so it takes, in America, it's also a drinking society. So we've got to take that, if parents drink at home, then there's likelihood that the kid's going to drink at home because we're teaching that it's okay to do so. So there's all that normal stuff. So they're the normal parameters, and I guess these sit outside of the normal parameters that these kids will go to the extreme to deal with what they need to deal with. A further study in the United States found that 28% of physically abused adolescents used drugs compared to 14% non-abused adolescents. And I know the United States stats, but they just give us an awareness that 28%, I mean, population of America is in the hundreds of millions, so that's quite a significant number. So, we've got about 22 million in Australia, and so it's just about doing that comparative study and about, okay, so maybe it's about 8% or 10% of young people that are like this, perhaps. So, just keep that in mind. Compared to 22% of the non-abused group, 36% of physically abused adolescents also had high levels of alcohol use. I think that's a double right there. Aggression, violence, and criminal activity. Now, in my current work here in Parental Youth Services, I'm sort of based in a little suburb down the road called Mandurah. Oh, it's not so little. But we're experiencing a phenomenon in our service where we've got young boys with single parent homes that are becoming highly aggressive, and so it's quite an interesting phenomenon that there's this display of aggression, and often it's linked not because they're angry people, but it's often linked to a higher level of stress, high level of trauma, and it's trying to get that unpacked for young people is really, really important, so they understand what's driving it and not necessarily labelled as angry young men. It's really important that we don't label them angry young men because they can't do anything more with that. That's it, they're labelled. We've got to be careful with that. In addition to feeling pain and suffering themselves, children exposed to abuse and neglect are at an increased risk of inflicting pain on others and developing aggressive and violent behaviour in adolescence. Children will become what we teach them. So if we teach them that abuse is okay, then they're going to carry that philosophy into their adolescent life. There's some other rationale behind it, but I just believe it's a monkey see, monkey do type thing. So we teach them to be violent. We show them that being abusive is okay. We show them that violence is okay. Then they're going to take that into relationships, and they're going to demonstrate that because that's all they know. And that's quite limiting for them to think that there's other ways of relating. So again, it's about that awareness when you're working with boys, particularly who have become more violent, but even now, little adolescent girls are becoming increasingly violent. So when we work with that context, we just got to understand that that's all they might know, and it might take strong role modeling and maybe some mentoring if you've got it in your area to show them that not necessarily the right way to do things. There are other ways of getting your needs met without raising your fist or being verbally abusive or aggressive. There are other ways of dealing with this stuff. And I guess it's just about doing that extra research and how to do that with young boys and model that quite effectively for them, and especially young girls as well. Research suggests that physical abuse and exposure to family violence are most consistent predictors of youth violence. There you go. In a meta-analysis by Gilbert and colleagues, both prospective and retrospective studies indicate that strong association between child abuse and neglect and criminal behaviour. A National Institute of Justice study in the United States predicted that abused and neglected children were 11 times more likely to be arrested for criminal behaviour in adolescence. That's excluding poverty as well. I think poverty can create a crime element just out of sheer need to make cash. But this is again, it's just probably just focusing a little bit out on those parameters. 83% of children in the Take Two program in Victoria just demonstrated repeat and severe violence towards others. So when we talk to young people who are doing these things, we've got to, again, they're doing it because it's what they know, and they're doing it because they've gone into peer, maybe gang culture, because it's probably the most trusting relationship that they have. So again, it's a long work. It's not a quick fix because we'll go into brain development soon, and it's that quick. We said that long journey, that long process, because it's a lot of testing for us as well. And the young person's probably thinking, are you going to stay around long enough, or am I going to be assigned another social worker in 6 months or in 3 months? It's quite a phenomenon that the staff turnover in these high pressure roles that are out there. And so the young person's probably seen 4 or 5 counsellors or 6 or 7 youth workers, or maybe had about 3 or 4 social workers before they even walk through your door, and let alone the justice system and everything else that they have to deal with. So it's a bit of a journey that you have to do with it, and you start off in the surface level, so if it's the criminality or it's the drug use, and you unpack that for them, you do the work with them, and then you start breaking it down, and you start talking about family of origins, family systems, talk about significant relationships that they're involved in. And then eventually the stories will come out that would sound quite terrible for us, but probably very normal for them. And it's about working with that story and honouring that story and mentoring and role modelling desired behaviour. So if you're offensive about swearing, maybe it's a role modelling, hey, when you're in this space, we don't use those words. Maybe outside that space you can, but in this space, like a counselling space or an interview, that you don't. And it's just showing them a different way of relating and a different way of being with another person. Because you're probably a person, who cares and is genuine and authentic, and they're not used to that. They're not used to the wishy-washy, feely type stuff, maybe. And so that's going to be really hard for them to translate. Or where is the F-bomb? Where is that C word? why are you being so nice to me? What do you want? You know, all this sort of stuff. So there's all this suspicion going on inside their head, and it's about to get through that and just say, hey, no, this is genuine, this is authentic, and this is a good space for you and I to connect. Teenage pregnancy. Adverse consequences of teenage pregnancy and risky sexual activity may also be associated with experience of abuse and neglect. Research has consistently linked teenage pregnancy with experience of sexual abuse. A study by Ferguson and colleagues found that young women 18 years of age exposed to child sexual abuse had significantly higher rates of teenage pregnancy, increased rates of sexually transmitted diseases, higher rates of multiple sexual partners, and appeared to be more vulnerable to further sexual assaults and rape. And I guess with girls being sexually abused is that real sexualization of them. And so I've heard stories where the abuser gets them to dress up sexy, and so it's reinforcing that if I don't dress sexy, nobody's going to like me, the guys are not going to like me, and all this sort of stuff. And maybe through that sexual abuse they learn that this is the only way I can be loved, because sex is very different for girls, as you probably be aware. So they probably experience that process emotionally very, very differently. So that's using sex as a means to find love. And we know in healthy relationships that's not necessarily the right way to do things. That's not the right way to do things. And so we need to be able to show them there are different ways to experience love without necessarily engaging in sexual stuff. A study by Ferguson and colleagues found that young women, that's a double up, sorry guys. So homelessness. Research suggests that children and young people may encounter homelessness or housing instability as a result of abuse and neglect, and particularly from domestic or family violence and disputes. I worked in the homeless sector for a long time, and the amount of young people that come through, because they just can't live at home because of the violence and there's nowhere else to go, and they come to a program like ours, for example, and the stories that they tell, that dad comes home drunk and he's drunk every night and he's just abusive and he's aggressive. May not be physically, but it just creates this really unsafe place for them, and so they feel they can't live there. Or the mum gets beaten up and they don't want to be a part of it anymore, or dad has been physically violent. And I say dad because statistically, men are the main perpetrators of violence in the home. And so often it's that powerful figure in their life that's become this highly aggressive and highly abusive person, and it sort of freaks them out and creates this uncertainty, creates this need just to get out and be with their peers who appear to be more trusting than maybe dad or the stepdad or mum's boyfriend or whatever the case may be. And most women caught in domestic violence situations are torn between the children and the person that they love, and so that mum's inability to make a decision can often lead to a lot of unsafe choices. So they stay in this violent relationship and put everyone at risk, and because of this idea that she doesn't want to leave him because he loves him, and so it's all that family system that's quite problematic in that sort of sense. So homelessness is more likely to evaluate in adulthood. However, the Australian Bureau of Statistics data showed that 34,000 children in Australia were homeless in 2005-2006, 33% of the homeless population. So that was that then. In Perth right now we have a housing crisis, so I can only imagine that statistic is out of date, probably needs to be updated, but in 6 years I can only say it wouldn't be any better. If anything, it's getting a lot worse. We have families living in cars in parks and stuff because of housing affordability is a real issue. So I can only imagine, though, that's probably a working family, like fly in, fly out, perhaps, who just moved over here. So, but a family on welfare, housing affordability is a real issue. You mess up, you lose your home, you're out on the street, there's nowhere else to go. And so it's a real concern. Australian Institute of Health and Welfare indicated that 54,000 children were accompanied with their parents, 86 of whom were mothers, in supported accommodation, so women's refuge, things like that. In 2005-2006, the main reason for women with children to seek support was domestic or family violence. Staggering statistic. It's a criminal event, but we, for whatever reason, it's not often treated as such when women are beaten up or when women are threatened with knives and all that sort of stuff. What I've come across in the last year is the rise of parents leaving the house, going to women's refuge because their adolescent children are becoming perpetrators of violence. So that's an interesting thing that's been reported by a local women's refuge where I work. So it's quite an interesting statistic. It'd be good to see some of the outcomes of that and see what what initiatives are going to be put in place for that. Young people who are removed from care of their parents because of abuse or neglect may also face homelessness or unemployment soon after leaving out-of-home care when they turn 18. The lack of social support networks and poor academic achievement often contribute to the difficulties that young people face in finding adequate housing and employment after care. For more detailed discussion on relationships between child abuse and neglect and adverse consequences of unemployment, homelessness, and adult, see the National Clearinghouse resource sheet. Now, I don't have that, but I can definitely make a note of that and give that to Stephen. But I think that's more localised for Western Australia, but I definitely can make that available. I've got that somewhere here. So, yeah.
I'll make a note of that just so we make sure we get it, Kevin.
Thanks, mate. That'd be great.
No problem.
So fatal abuse, which is the worst possible outcome for anybody, the most tragic and extreme consequences of child abuse and neglect is the abuse that results in death. World Health Organization estimates that 155,000 deaths around the world of children aged 15 or younger occur every year due to abuse and neglect. And I would imagine that's got a lot to do with not only disease, but war, becoming child soldiers and things like that, which we don't often, we experience a different form. We don't actually have diseases or per se, or we don't have wars or anything. So child abuse that results in death is often the result of a parent, and that's quite a sad and pretty depressing sort of way of looking at it. But unfortunately, it does happen. There's been a few big media in the last 5 years of people doing that sort of thing. A large number of deaths caused by abuse and neglect go unreported due to insufficient investigation or failure to run post-mortal examinations. Not relevant for Australia because we do investigate these things quite seriously. This suggests that estimations of worldwide deaths caused by abuse and neglect could be even higher. That's just an awareness that fatal abuse does occur, and it's quite alarming when it does. It shocks our society when we read about it in the paper. It's quite a sad thing to hear. So this is the 11-year-old brain that I managed to source. So on my left-hand side is a healthy 11-year-old brain, and on the right-hand side is a malnutrited brain. And it's important that we sort of understand that trauma impacts brain development very, very significantly. And actually, what happens is that the brain, as you can see in the left-hand side, it's bigger than the one on the right-hand side, simply because the thick white lining is there is developed through abuse and stress and all that sort of stuff. So a child of abuse actually has a smaller brain size that leads to further significant delays in significant key developments in their life. So when we look at the trauma in children or trauma in adults, trauma in developing brain, what are we saying? It's more than just behaviour. Or are we actually seeing things that we examine the brains of those who have been traumatized? The slide that you see here shows two cross-sectional views of the brain on the MRI. What you see on the left is a normal 11-year-old male, and the brain and the surrounding tissue in the skull, and on the right you see a malnutrited 11-year-old male. What is demonstrated is the physical impact trauma on the brain. So this is a boy who's experienced physical abuse. This is caused not just by physical abuse, but through significant malnutrition and neglect. And a study done by Dr. DeVellis, he studied the brain of children who's abused and compared them to the brains of children who are not abused. Dr. DeVellis found that the brains of children who have been abused were different. If you look again at the left brain, there is a healthy child's brain. You see a thin external layer, so that thick white one you saw on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, it was really, really thin, if you remember. The white matter, the white area arching over the brain image, and if you look at the image on the right, you see a thicker white band over the brain. This shows atrophy or shrinkage of the brain cortex, the cerebral cortex. Then besides the cortex, the other structures, the hippocampus, which is lower down, is also smaller in size. If you look at the triangles, the black triangles in the brain, they're also called lateral ventricles. Lateral ventricles. On the left-hand side, they are small triangles, pretty uniform. On the right, these are extended triangles, much larger in this MRI image. So what you see here is the impact of trauma causing shrinkage in the brain. As the brain shrinks, the white covering the expanded ventricles enlarges as well. This gives the credence to the fact that trauma and neglect impacts on a person's brain. And the impact is where the function and the form are interconnected. So the function and behavior follow the form changes. This means changes in behavior would occur with someone whose brain has noticeably changed. So that's a real, scientific, biological explanation of everything, and it's a little bit out of my league, but I put that information in there because I just want to sort of paint this picture that when we work with children that have been abused or maltreated and they're going through all these really struggles in life, it just goes that they might be 12 or 13 or 14, but their brain really isn't quite representative, or their cognition isn't quite representative of their age. And often we put these great enormous tasks on people that you have to go to college or you have to go to work and you have to do all these things. That's what normal people do. But what we find is that the stress and the anxiety associated with that actually complicates things for them, so that they can be sneaky about it and sabotage, and they go about their own way of getting out of that sort of stuff because they're a bit frightened or they're not sure how to do it, or they're distrusting of the process, or they might not be ready for that sort of change. They might not be able to do the things that we ask them to do. So not only do we need to create a safe place where they can unpack all this, we need to be realistic in our expectations about working with young people who experience this sort of stuff and where they're at. So maybe we need to be lower our expectations so that when we work with them, that when they don't get something or they struggle with something or they're stressed out, maybe it's about us managing rather than them managing. Maybe we need to look at our approaches and go, what would work best in this situation, rather than trying to get them to fit in a certain therapeutical model or a certain youth work practice or whatever the case may be. I know in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's certain things like accommodation, food, and all that sort of stuff needs to be met. But how can we do that effectively for these people? What sort of expectations can we have that's going to be okay to work with them, considering that they might not be fully ready to take on normal developmental sequencing? A researcher in Boston published a groundbreaking twin study in 2003. When she looked at twins who discordant for trauma, one twin had a history of significant trauma and the other didn't. She found that the twin who had the trauma history had, on average, an 8-point difference in IQ scores. The trauma was the only distinguishing variable in the lives of these twins. So as you can see, trauma is a significant risk factor for negative outcomes such as school failure, juvenile delinquency. Based on that, things in the way. Hang on, break it. So based on that fact, psychological trauma is defined by the American Psychiatric Association as an event or events that involve actual or threatening death in a serious injury or threat to the physical integrity of self or others. Examples include military combat, violent personal attack, natural or human-made disasters, torture. For children, sexually traumatic events may include age-inappropriate sexual experiences without violence or injury. That's in the DSM-4. Those who experience that, that's a diagnostic manual for all sort of clinical disorders. Like adults who experience trauma, children and adolescents who have been abused cope by using a variety of psychological mechanisms. One of the most effective ways people cope with overwhelming trauma is called dissociation. That's a key word, so if you want to write that down and highlight that, underline it, make it big on your notepad or whatever you want to do, it's an important word, and it explains a lot of pattern behaviours with young people. This dissociation is a complex mental process during which there is a change in a person's consciousness which disturbs the normal connected function of identity, memory, thoughts, feelings, and experiences. Daydreaming during a boring lecture is a good example. So I hope you're not daydreaming right now. I hope you're connected with me. But there's a healthy form of dissociation, and that's one example. Gee, this guy's boring, he's talking too much.
None of us are. It's all right, Kevin.
So, like, I've got to go and check my Facebook now or whatever. But then there's an unhealthy form of dissociation, and that really is about ignoring this emotional pain, these memories. And so what we'll do is we'll do anything we can to sever connection with these memories and these emotional problems that we're experiencing. And so often we'll mask these with drugs and alcohol. Maybe we become workaholics. Maybe we won't form relationships. We avoid relationships. We avoid friendships, closeness, intimacy. We quickly disassociate. And with guys, it's an important thing to consider with young males, because when young males are sexually abused, they can't control the arousal factors in their biology, and so what happens for them, things happen like, they get an erection and all that sort of stuff, and then there's this lot of guilt and a lot of shame. So when they do form a relationship with a girlfriend and they have their first sexual encounter, because of the biological reactions, it becomes really, really difficult and really hard to process. Now, if you've got a young person like that, they probably need a little bit more than counselling. So maybe a clinical psychologist to a psychiatrist would be the best approach for that, because that really is quite a messed up sort of process that they're in. They can't do it because of these memories, and so they need some intensive work there. So just be mindful that some cases the sexual abuse counsellors can do things, and other cases it can be quite extreme, that maybe a good referral to a good clinical psychologist / psychiatrist might be the process. And I know it's expensive, even under the Medicare rebate scheme, it's quite expensive, but there's ways around that, and so it's just about exploring options. Bear with me for a minute. Okay, so what I find is that when we work with young people, sometimes it can be a trap for us to work in isolation with young people, even if mum and dad, a good mum and dad, they're really well supportive of the young person, and it was a relative that did the damage and all that sort of stuff. Often we won't recognise their own grief and loss, and that's what essentially that's what they're going through, a lot of blame. So this is awareness of what to look for in parents, because often parents will come to you first and say, my child's been sexually abused, I need help, I'm not sure what to do. Initially it was okay, he seemed all right, but now he's transitioning into adolescence, I'm not sure what to do. So what we got here is, the seven stages of grief. So parents often will respond in denial when they first hear about it. Oh, that's not true. Uncle so-and-so, he's a good guy, works hard, and got a family of his own, what? No, I don't believe it. What's happened? Then there's anger when they accept the truth that it has happened, and then they try and bargain and rationale it, and then depression, sadness, and then they come into a place of acceptance eventually, and that takes a lot of time for them to get to that place. But we need to be mindful that this isn't going to go away, and sometimes I know sometimes services are time poor in what they can provide for people. There's limited number of counselling sessions or limited time for support and all that sort of stuff. So sometimes we just got to be wise about what we can do and just be upfront about what we can do, talk about our limitations as a service, but then be wise about, maybe we could do some work and then in conjunction with someone else, or maybe we can recruit someone to come in periodically. Just got to think smart, think like, how can we best support the parents throughout this process? So denial is a normal reaction for any parent. To have some amount of denial when first hearing the highly emotional news that their child was sexually abused over time, more facts unfold, conversations occur about sexual abuse. Denial usually gives way to the next stage of grief. So they get angry, which I think is a good response. Once parental acceptance of at least some facts surrounding the sexual abuse has begun, anger will follow. This anger could be directed towards the perpetrator, child, or parent itself. So they might be angry with themselves for the inability to protect. I should have known better. They might be angry at the child, saying, well, it's all your fault. So the parent actually might not believe the facts and be angry at the child for creating this story. This anger includes the realization of the losses that the parent will face as a secondary victim of the child's sexual abuse. Non-offending parents will appear to suffer more losses. For example, if the perpetrator is a step-parent or a live-in partner, he or she will likely to ask to leave the home as a result of non-offending parent faces a loss of companionship and maybe even a friendship. And as a default position for us, the child, we believe the child. So it's not our job to say you're right or wrong. That's not our role. That's the role of the investigator. Over here we have a concept called mandatory reporting, and so our role is to hear the story and report to our coordinator, have a discussion about where that's got to go, and then make the report. And it's just out of our hands. Some services are a little bit, we work for services that are not obligated to mandatory report, but there is certain key agencies throughout Perth that are obligated to report these events. And then it's up to the Department of Child Protection to investigate with the Child Abuse Unit. They'll do all the homework, investigate and determine the story. But it's not our role to do that. We're not there to make a judgment on whether the child's telling the truth or the child's telling a lie. We believe the child, and that's our default position. in our work. So bargaining, parents move from anger to a bargaining stage as greater acceptance of the sexual abuse occurs. So as you can see, it's a process that's not going to happen in like a matter of hours. Parents now accept the fact that the sexual abuse has occurred, but begin to struggle with the level of the impact of sexual abuse. So all that stuff previously about behaviours, learning difficulties, all that sort of stuff is actually going to impact the family dynamic, especially if mum and dad aren't the offenders, but it was a relative or a friend of the family, which is mostly the profile of offenders. It actually can destroy the family unit. So not only does it impact the young person, but then it becomes this ripple effect throughout the family. It affects other siblings, it affects the relationship between dad and mum, and all the stress and all the pressure and all that sort of stuff occurs. Child and family need for recovery. Bargaining occurs when parents look and hope for a last and less painful recovery. Fast and less painful recovery. They want a quick fix, but the reality is there is no quick fix. But they're just so much in pain they just want, like, it's like a headache, just take some Panadol and make the headache go away. Unfortunately, it's not a quick fix. In doing so, they might try to minimise the impact of sexual abuse and unintentionally give the message that it will just go away. And the young person will pick that up. So if we don't talk about it, it'll just go away and we can go on and live our lives. Nice, but the reality is it won't go away because it'll impact on school, it'll impact on friends, it'll impact on maybe young Joey just not going to sports anymore, becomes isolated, sits in his room, plays Xbox all day and just totally disengages. So it won't go away. And it's better to face this reality than trying to minimise it. Depression and sadness, a normal response to serious changes suddenly forced upon one's life is sadness and depression. As parents move through this stage, they come to realise the extent of changes and the degree of impact on the child and family resulting from the sexual abuse. Parents in this stage acknowledge recovery could be a long-term process and that the sexual abuse is not going to go away. Non-offending parent appears to experience the effects of this stage to a greater degree than parents of extra-familiar sexual abuse. Acceptance. Parents who enter the stage are accepting the facts and impact of sexual abuse. Recovery and healing process are no longer feared by the parents. Parents at this stage realise and acknowledge that their child and family can survive the losses, changes, and the recovery process. Alright, so what I want to do now is touch on this subject briefly, sexual offending behaviour, because what often is believed that if a male is sexually abused, then he's likely to become a perpetrator. And that's probably not true in a sense. It's probably out of 100% of males that are abused, probably only likely 5, maybe 10% of that population would become offenders. So it's quite small. But the way the media portrays it, it would seem quite large. And so what we're going to do, we're just going to talk about it. I'm nowhere near a forensic expert to talk about sexual offending behaviour, so any questions relating to a paraphilia, which is often it's referred to, is probably best directed at someone who actually works with sexual offending behaviours. But I'll do my best to bring some awareness around this topic, and then we'll take it from there. So there's a distinct difference between adolescent and male-female sexual offending behaviour. The following is a very brief overview because it's such a complex and clinical sort of approach to it. Adolescent female sexual abusers are quite rare, and the research is relatively new in how to identify and treat adolescent female sex offenders. So out of 100% of the crime around the world, women make up about 10% of all crime globally, and so sexual offending females are around the 1%, maybe even. So they're quite rare, and we're only just starting to understand what that's about. There's also a contradictory research and contention on the subject, so it's not worth going into the research because there's all over shots and different points of view. So we're just still waiting on some concrete research and longitude studies on the area. Matthews and Speltz, as cited in Coonan, profile adolescent adult female abusers in these 3 distinct categories. Teacher lover, who is usually involved with the adolescent or pre-boys. They want to teach them about sex. So we've had some teachers in news that had sex with teenage boys and be an adult teacher, so that's where they fit in that profile. Male coerced offenders who initially abused in conjunction with a male may be later abused independently. This type of abuse is extremely dependent and non-assertive. Predisposed offender who has been sexually abused themselves from a very young age. They initiate the abuse themselves and usually abuse their own children. Their intention appears to be non-threatening emotional intimacy. So they're the three categories. Further to the profile of Matthew's 1993 study of 36 women as cited in Coonan explains the following. Like male offenders, women offenders will come from chaotic, abusive backgrounds, feel they do not belong with and have low status among their peers. They're often friendless and will do almost anything for acceptance. Exception in relation to male offenders is that women offenders do not involve or coerce anyone else to offend. So they do it in isolation rather than form partnerships or gang rapes or pacts and things like that. They use force or violence less frequency, so it's not they're not into violence a whole lot, and that probably linked to more nurturing elements to the female side. The research found to a lesser degree threaten their victims to remain silent, so they're not likely to threaten them to do that like men would. There's a mixed information around the issue of denial. One example found women more likely to admit offending and take some responsibility. Amy McCary, as cited in Matthews, revealed that because if the nurturing and caring role and the importance of women may place on it, denial was found to be greater. Found to be greater. Male offenders will offend at an early age. However, out of 36 women that participated in the research, only 2 offended in their adolescence. So often you'll find boys and adolescent males tend to be offending and aggressive, and then they take that into adult life, where women tend to be more adult-like, or in their young adults, adult-like, when they offend. So it's quite an interesting statistic, but still very small, 36. It's quite a small study. Figures from New South Wales on initial presentation of sexual assault services indicated that in 1995-96, a male child under the age of 16 was the assailant in 16.2% of cases of child sex assault. Male adults who are known to the victim are the most common assailants in the case of sexual assaults in New South Wales. So that's a key indicator to profiling, is that the stranger danger message is a really good message, one that should not be avoided. But often sexual abuse is often the victim is known to the perpetrator. So they're usually a coach, a mentor, a friend of the family, an uncle, relative, or a parent. So that's how it generally works, profiling in that sense. For 3 out of the last 4 reporting years, however, the second most common assailant for girls was a male child under the age of 16. Similarly, in recent reporting years, the second most common assailant for boys was a male child under the age of 16, when a male child under the age of 16 was the most common assailant in 27.1% of the cases. So quite a startling statistic, and they're not recent statistics, but it just gives you an idea of the prevalency there. Overwhelming 99% of the person in prison for sex offences are male. The highest rate of imprisonment for sex offences is for those between the ages of 40 and 44. A little over 3/4 of all prisoners fell in the 20 to 55 age range. The following table classifies sexual behaviour of young people into age-appropriate, very concerning categories. So 8 to 12, pre-adolescent, age-appropriate sexual behaviours. So occasional masturbation, show me yours, show me mine with my peers. Now, that occasional masturbation is at the higher end. It's not necessarily at the lower end, because these years boys are entering puberty earlier, so 12, 13, it's probably more acceptable, but definitely not at the lower end. Show me mine, show me yours with peers is okay. Kissing and flirting, genital or reproduction conversation with peers, dirty words or jokes with peer groups. So that's appropriate. So that's a parameter. Anything outside of that parameter, like I'm an 8-year-old and I'm saying to you that I had sex, you got a little red flag goes up, or I'm doing this, or I watched watched dad's porn on the internet, and then I went and did it to my little brother or something. These are little red flags that should go up. We follow the normal parameters here. Concerning sexual behaviours, so attempting to expose others' genitals, sexual knowledge too great for their age once context is considered, preoccupation with masturbation, single occurrence with peeping, exposing obscenities, pornographic interest. Sources include the internet, pay TV videos, DVDs and magazines. stimulating foreplay or intercourse with peers with clothes on. So these are really concerning behaviours. And so if you've got any cases of young people that you're working with, or you're aware of some stuff, maybe it's a chat with your supervisor and say, a little red flag, hey, I did this, this is what I'm thinking. Very concerning sexual behaviours. Compulsive masturbation, including task interruptions to masturbate. Repeated or chronic peeing, exposing your obscenities. Chronic pornographic interest. Child pornography sources include internet, pay TV, etc. Degradation or humiliation of self using sexual themes. Degradation or humiliation of others using sexual themes. Touching genitals of others without permission. Sexually explicit threats, written or verbal. Forced exposure of others' genitals. Simulating intercourse with peers with clothes off. Penetration of dolls, children, or animals. So they're the parameters. So if you're getting any of this sort of stuff coming through, red flag goes up, take notes, chat with your supervisor, discuss a course of action, what do we need to do, is the best thing. And a little thing here is that we don't make decisions in isolations in regards to most cases, but in particular with this sort of stuff. We want to be in consultation regularly with our supervisors, or if we're counsellors, with our clinical supervisors, all that sort of stuff, youth workers, your coordinators, or your seniors, whoever, but we don't make these decisions in isolations. We just take notes, we give a story, we do some work, then we go away and discuss it, and maybe something else needs to occur. So 13 to 18-year-olds, so age-appropriate, sexually explicit conversation with peers, yep, we get it. Obscenities with jokes within the cultural norm, yep, we get it, the old fart joke, all that sort of stuff. Sexual innuendo and flirting, it's all part of that growing up, look at me, I'm gorgeous. Solitary masturbation, yeah, that's still part of exploring one's body. Kissing, hugging, holding hands, very normal. Foreplay, mutual, that sounds very healthy, and later on, about the 16th and 18, yeah, maybe some sexual intercourse at the end of the scale might occur, but if it happens at 13, I'll be red flag up and say, well, what's that about? Why are you suddenly now sexually active? You're not supposed to be. You've got to understand that the cut-off points for adolescents to be sexually active is 16 over here in Western Australia. I'm not sure what it's like over east, but any sexual activity under, like 15 and under, is considered a concern, and it falls under the Mandatory Reporting Act. So whether the young person's consensual or not, we have to do something about it because it's not appropriate. That's guidelines we work with over here anyway. So concerning sexual behaviour, sexual preoccupation or anxiety, pornographic interest, promiscuity, verbal sexually aggressive themes or obscenities, invasions of other body spaces. So touching of genitals, breasts, bum, all that sort of stuff, probably not okay. In fact, it is not okay. So very concerning sexual behaviours, compulsive masturbation, especially chronic or public. So if you've got a young person doing it in public, there's obviously concerns. Degradation or humiliation of both self and others using sexual themes, or subchronic preoccupation with sexually aggressive pornography. Attempting to expose others' genitals, touching other genitals without permission, sexually explicit threats, obscene phone calls, exhibition, voyeurism, sexual harassment, sexual contact with significantly younger people, sexual contact with animals, and false penetration. So some of it's a bit, but red flag. So again, when you've got something like this happening and you're talking to somebody, the idea is that we listen to the story, we hear what they have to say, be a bit challenging, but say, look, that might be a bit inappropriate, but you've got to raise these things with our supervisor and say, look, I've got this case, this is what happened in session, or this is what they talked about. Red flag, what do you think we need to do with this? What's some guidelines here? There are no casual factors in regards to adolescent sexual abusing others. There are 4 dominant risk factors which stand out in the cases that come to attention, and these are being a witness to or being directly exposed to family violence. So that's a precursor. Chronic long-term neglect, cumulative harm, inappropriate witnessing of sexual activity. So walking in on mum and dad doing the nasty is, it's just one of those things, but being forced to watch, there's a difference. So being constantly exposed, forced, even watching pornography on TV, you're not allowed to leave the room, you have to stay and watch this or something, is not okay, especially if they're young, or any case. Being a victim of sexual abuse themselves. So anything that's high risk, it's going to put high risk factors in place for the young people. We need to start saying that this is not okay and start working on how we're going to resolve this. In the past, the influence of adult principles about sexual offending theory, power and domination were considered to be primary reasons for young people sexually abusing others. The research and treatment field now recognises that these behaviours are more complex and multifaceted. It is now generally accepted that there are a number of pathways to undertaking sexually abusive behaviours. There are 4 potential pathways along which an adolescent's sexually abusive behaviour may be shaped. The experience of sexual activity as the primary goal of the behaviour, with violence and aggression being the means to the end of the behaviour. Aggression and violence as the primary aim of behaviours, with sexually abusive behaviours secondary to broader conduct disorder behaviour. Experimentation, exploration with somewhat naive understanding of the larger consequences. So again, they might not fully comprehend that you can't have sex under the age of 15, but they might have done it just out of curiosity, but not fully understanding that, you know, they can get in trouble with the law, possibly end up on the sex offenders register and all that sort of stuff. So maybe some psychoeducation work's really, really important with young people around these sort of practices that we just need to be aware. Mental illness or cognitive impairment that may result in the young person having a little understanding of appropriateness or consequences of their actions. Okay, adolescents with sexually abusive behaviours in the family resource. So there's a link there. I'm sure that link will be available. So I'm sure Steve will make that available for people if they're interested. But it's just with the Victorian government website, so Department of Health Services.
Yeah, I've got all the references for tonight. So if anyone needs them, they can email me. My email address will be during the question and answer time on the last slide.
Brilliant. All right. So I'm assuming everybody knows about confidentiality and its limits, but basically what we talk about remains confidential. So the young person needs to know that this is a safe place. Not even mum and dad are going to hear what we're talking about. This means that whatever we talk about prohibits communication and information to other people, organisations, unless you have given consent to do so. So confidentiality is about empowering them to know that this is a safe place and that any information that needs to be shared, we need to get their permission, like anything else. But there's only 2 reasons. Oh, there's actually 3. I don't know why I put 2 here, but there's actually 3 reasons. If you're a perceived risk to harm yourself, I might need to tell my supervisor, or I might need to do something about that. Keep you safe. Perceive you to be a risk of harming somebody else, need to do that. May need to breach to keep that person safe. Or if a judge of a court subpoenas me to breach confidence, so look at notes or case assessments and all that sort of stuff, then that's pretty rare, but that could happen. So they just need to be aware of that sort of stuff. And only the appropriate authorities will be notified, and every effort will be taken to inform you that this breach will occur. So again, it's about giving them that knowledge, giving them that power, let them know that not everything's guaranteed in terms of, everything's 100% secret. No, there are limits to what we can do. 2 of them are really about their safety. It's not about anything else. We want to make sure they're okay, or they're not going to do anything silly that's going to put them in further jeopardy with the justice system or whatever the case may be. So we've got mandatory reporting over here. I'm not sure what other states have overseas, but ours is basically it's a reporting legislation. Mandatory reporting legislation requires specific people, professionals, to report concerns of child abuse to Child Protection Agency. So it's the Department of Child Protection over here. In Western Australia, the legislation covering mandatory reporting of child sexual abuse is the Children and Community Services Amendment, reporting child sexual abuse of children. 2008, and it's from 2009. This amendment became part of the Children and Community Service Act 2004. Boring, I know, but important. Who are mandatory reporters under the legislation? So doctors, nurses, midwives, teachers, and police officers. Now I know when I wrote this, I knew there was an update coming out, so I wrote this last year. I think this year there's some more people, more professionals being added to the list. So at the moment, counsellors and psychologists and youth workers aren't on the list, but I know eventually we will be included on the list. But I just want to say, just because you're not on the list, it's good practice to protect the child. So if they do disclose, even though you're not on the list, it might be in your best interest and the interest of the child to ensure that they're looked after and protected. So professionally and ethically, we should respond anyway. What does the legislation mean to mandatory reporters? Legislation requires mandatory reporters to report suspected child abuse. So it just has to be suspected. Don't need evidence. Don't need to judge the child right or wrong. Just need to know they've disclosed or you suspect. You've got to do it. Use judgment. Use your supervisor. Use your colleagues, but don't do it in isolation. That will be the wrong thing to do. Child sexual abuse, if they form this belief based on reasonable grounds, so reasonable grounds is the context, in the course of their paid or unpaid work to the Department of Child Protection. Legislation focuses on child sexual abuse and other forms of abuse. Physical and emotional neglect should be continued to be reported, but there's no penalty if a report is not made. But we're bound by our ethics, so over here we've got the Youth Work Code of Ethics here. I'm a counsellor, so I'm bound by my governing body, the ACA ethics, all that sort of stuff. So, you know, where the child's in harm, I feel obligated and ethically obligated to respond. How is a child defined in relation to mandatory reporting? A child is defined as in Children and Community Service Act as under 18 years of age. So I'm just going to skip over this because this is just all legality stuff, but it's there. You can have it if you want it. So just skip over this. So there's the link there for us. So you can just go to that link. I mean, you get the referral. So just go there and you'll read all this fascinating information about that sort of stuff. Boring but important is what I'd say. So
I love this photo.
Management.
I love it.
That's all I do all day is just work with Angry Birds.
The family shot.
That's it. There's me in the middle. Okay. So best practice. So we're coming to an end soon. So best practice. The most important and immediate thing is always believe the child. Reassure the child that telling you was the right thing to do. Maintain a calm appearance. Find a quiet place to talk. Because I know youth workers sometimes do outreach work. Sometimes it's just best to get them away from a crowd and into a safe place. You need to follow your organisation reporting structure. Do not deal with these situations on your own. If your role is not a therapeutic role such as a counsellor, then referring to an appropriate service would be required. When doing this, consider the non-offending parent and work with them. So it's not working in isolation, but try and work collectively with everybody as much as you can and within reason, reasonably. Is probably better. Be patient. Their trust has been broken. It takes a long time for this to be re-established. You might be the only positive and safe adult that they know, so just keep that in mind. Clear boundaries. This is about role modelling, designed behaviour. What is okay, what is not okay. So that's a conversation that could occur over time. Treat them age-appropriate levels. Most offenders will make the child behave like an adult, so dress up the young girl sexy and all that sort of stuff when she's only like 9. So if you're seeing her at 13, then make sure you talk to her at a 13-year-old. Don't engage in her perceived understanding of adult life. Talk to her at her age, is really all boy at their age. Sexually abused boys or girls who adopt macho or abusive styles to compensate for their own victimisation need help replacing these behaviours with more socialising ways. So that's a process. So if you're angry, and you seem to be angry all the time, so maybe we need to look at different ways of communicating and relating. So that's a process. Not necessarily dealing with the sexual abuse, but it's just dealing with the externalising behaviours that they use to protect that wound. Anxiety and depression therapy is required. Referral to a counselling service is strongly recommended. Anger. Young people need to learn that anger that they feel is okay. Nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly a normal response. How they use their anger is where people will judge or punish them. Finding a socially acceptable outlet may be required to help them channel their anger in a positive way and a controlled way. Hear what they have to say. So probably more about listening than doing anything else. Yes, you're almost there. So again, protective factors. Talk to them in a private space. Explain your limits and confidentiality. Follow your agency's policies and procedures. Let another colleague be aware that you're seeing the student or client and where, because you don't want to put yourself in danger. Develop a safety plan. For example, if the conversation goes longer than 40 minutes, have someone knock on the door and say there's a phone call for you. And that minimises risk towards you, and it just protects you as a counsellor or youth worker. You might not need that because the young person's okay, but you might have a young person who's prone to making allegations. So you just want to be in a safe place yourself. Do not operate outside your role. Do not make promises to the young person. Keep a record of the conversation. Summary to one whole page ought to be enough. Don't give out your personal details or have a young person in your car unless it is cleared by a senior member of the staff. So again, just practical stuff, but role modelling boundaries, what's okay, what's not okay. Do not interview the young person. If they only give you a little information, that's okay. DCP or the police have experts to handle the situation. And that's me done, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Does anyone have any questions? We haven't got any little question boxes come up just as yet, but
okay. I can get a drink of water
now. Yeah, go for your life. Grab a water while they type in their questions. I'd just like to remind everyone, next week we've actually got Leona Dawson joining us, who has a master's degree in counselling and psychotherapy and has 18 years experience supporting adults and young people. She's a certified focusing trainer by the Focusing Institute of New York. Also, we have our website launching soon, which will be psychwebinars.com. Okay, we have a question. Let me see if I can pull it up a little bigger. Sorry, everyone. Okay, Kay has a question. Do the brain changes remain evident in adulthood? Kelly.
That's a really good question, and one of the most recent discoveries, or not recent, but one of the neurology developments is that we understand the plasticity of the brain. So we understand that the cognitive neural pathways, they can be changed. It's not like the old thinking that once you've learnt something, that was it. But we understand the plasticity of the brain allows change. So I believe if intervention happens for the child, I'm not sure about if the brain goes to a healthy size or not, but I do know that neural pathways can be over a process of time, obviously, new cognitive stuff can happen for the child. So these things that were once troubling are no longer troubling anymore for the child. But the thing with trauma and trauma memory, it doesn't go away. So if left undealt with, it definitely can go into adult life, and those memories can be real problematic and lead to all sorts of behaviours in adult life. So hopefully, Kay, that will give you some sort of answer to your question.
Okay, Susan also asked that she missed out on some of the webinar, and she'd like to know if we're going to be putting a recording up, which we will be, Susan. Thank you for asking. But we'll be putting a recording up most probably a little later on tonight. You'll be able to see it on our Facebook page, and that should be no problem whatsoever. You'll be able to access that. We don't have any other questions. Does anyone have any other questions that they'd like to ask Kevin? We've got a few of you there. No, they're all there. Oh, here we go. Marlisha, how are you going, Marlisha? Oh, there we go. We've got a couple of questions popping up now. All right, Marlisha asks, physical punishment like spanking can cause similar developmental obstacles for young people. How similar is this type of punishment to the effects of sexual abuse?
Oh, yeah. Can you just repeat the question, please?
Yeah, physical punishment like spanking can cause similar developmental obstacles for young people. How similar is this type of punishment to the
Hello? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Hello?
Can you not hear me?
Yeah, no, you just dropped out from
Kevin?
me. Sorry. So we're looking
Kevin?
at... Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Sorry, Kevin. I think she might be... I'll repeat the question again. She asks, physical punishment like spanking can cause similar developmental obstacles for young people. How similar is this type of punishment to the effects of sexual abuse? I assume she might be talking about the 11-year-old brain. I don't know.
Yeah, look, I think physical abuse is one thing, and I'm not gonna. I don't want to sort of get drawn into the is smacking okay sort of thing. Parents will do what parents do. That's my default position at this stage. But sexual abuse, at any age has an impact. So as soon as that occurs, and it affects attachment, so it affects relationships, but it also creates a high level of anxiety and a high level of depression in the child, in the adolescent. So that creates these developmental delays. So in cognition and biological development sequences can be hindered or impaired in that process. So hopefully that answers that question. So just as physical abuse can affect those processes, sexual abuse can also affect those processes. In fact, if anything, sexual abuse is a little bit more seedy in terms that the young person actually might believe that's okay for a process until they realise that it's not okay. So it can be quite deceptive, and that can also create certain cognitive issues for that young person.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Marlisha. Now, also, David asks again, yeah, is it possible to get a copy of the presentation? We'll be putting a recording up online, so that should be fine. That'll be available from our Facebook page later on tonight. David also, he asked another question: what can we do with young people who you mentioned, because of abuse, are unable to perform adult-like tasks like going to uni or work? So what can we
Yeah,
do with young people, yeah, because of abuse? Yeah.
yeah. There's no clear, real because when a young person experiences abuse, it becomes this individual experience, it's not a collective experience. So, each person will respond to the abuse in their own way. Some people can actually experience horrific sort of stuff and yet turn their life around and go on and be very, very successful authors or musicians or politicians and all that sort of stuff. But then there's another element to the person where that happens and they totally self-destruct and they totally go off the rails and that sort of stuff. My best solution, my best approach with all these things is to treat the story as unique and hold that in high regard, and then let them know about hope, because I think hope can be often not talked about in these. They feel like there's no hope because it's all this mess. But you communicate hope in the sense that it's okay how your life turns out, because hope is this ability to know that you can overcome these processes and learn to manage these situations. And hope will then allow you to think for the future, think for good things about yourself. Because right now, the young person is probably not thinking well about themselves. And we've got to somehow get reconnected to what we call core value. And once we get them into that core value that they are a valuable person, they are worthy, they are lovable, they are cherished, and they get to that acceptance, that's a very powerful sort of work to occur. Get them in that place, and then this hope says that, because you are worthy, you can go and get a really good job, and you can go to uni, you can go around Australia in your V-dub and go surfing. It's okay, because that's what you want to do, and that's perfectly okay. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to go to work. You don't have to go to uni. It's okay, but long as the work is about reconnecting to that core value that they are worthy people, and that healing and the hope comes from that place.
Yeah,
I hope that
definitely.
answers the question.
Well, yeah, I think it does. It did for me. Hope that answers your question, David. Now, Sue asks, do you treat children of incest the same as sexual abuse victims, or is that different again?
Well, I think it's the same in the same. It's
Mm.
still a sexual act. I
Yeah,
just think the relationship manipulation is different. I think if a primary caregiver took a sexual interest in a child and manipulated them to believe that that's okay, I think the impact is going to be quite the same, if not more devastating, as they get older and they realise that this relationship is not okay, um, and struggle with that. That maybe dad treated me in such a way that I lost my childhood. I didn't have a chance to be a child because I had to be dad's plaything, and it can be very much, if not the same, if not worse, than actually being abused, say, by the uncle in a one-off or a couple of times. I'm not sure, but it's really individual and maybe a little bit more impacting, I think.
Okay, we'll make this the last question for this evening, and it's a really good one to ask. And it's from Kelly. Do victims ever fully recover, or are the effects lifelong?
The effects are permanent. I don't think a person ever moves on to a point where they can completely go, what doesn't impact on me, because you're dealing with the memory, and you're dealing with all that. it's that violation that happens, and because it's you've been totally disempowered by the process, and it's someone's selfish behaviour that's taking their gratification out on you, and that stays with the victim for life. Unfortunately, it's like that's pretty powerful. Like I think I had a conversation with Steve earlier, and it's probably a part of the reason, not the whole reason, but it's probably part of the reason um, that there's no statutory limitations, meaning there's no you can go to, there's no statutory limitations on sexual abuse, because people who turn 40 or 50, maybe even 60, will then actually feel able to go and say, look, this happened to me when I was 12. And we've seen a lot of that, and now with the National Inquiry or the Royal Commission of Child Sexual Abuses in institutions like churches and state care, we've got people in their 50s and 60s coming forward with stories of being horrendously abused, and yeah, that doesn't go away. And so no, I don't think you'll ever completely get over it. The memory will always be there. The art of counselling sexual abuse, I think, to a degree, is about how do you manage those memories, and how do you manage in a way that you can actually rebuild your life, knowing that this is still a part of your life. This is, in essence, of who you are in a way now, and you just got to work with that.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to make that the last question, but just as I was saying that, she typed in another question, which actually runs right into this, because she asked, is there differences in the approach to treating child victims to treating adult survivors who don't disclose until many years after the abuse occurred? So I
Yeah.
thought I might just throw that
There's
one
there's
in there.
different there's different practices. I mean, the child that discloses or finds that's been abused, it's sort of a bit more immediate. I think. I think there's immediacy there that you can work with, and so minimise to some degree the anxiety, the depression, or the anger, or whatever the case may be. Even in adolescence, there's still that degree of empowerment where you can still work within that immediacy. And I think the work with adults, survivors of sexual abuse who, deal with a whole range of other issues, it's different work, because then you've got to get them to acknowledge it, and you've got to get them to name it, and it's a journey, because it's not only the sexual abuse, there's maybe other factors in their life that you've got to work through as well. So again, you start at the referring issue, so maybe anger management, but then as you go down into the levels, you start unpacking all this stuff. And in a child, it's pretty much not so deep, but it's all there at the top there. But in an adult, they've sort of buried it really deep into the subconscious, and it takes a while through many different techniques to get them to name that for themselves, and then to experience that, and then get through that and learn different techniques on how to manage that, other than using, say, alcohol or drugs or whatever.
Well, I guess they don't fully understand how wrong it is
Yeah,
when at a younger age,
yeah,
probably.
that's
So
right.
so they're not. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all very much for coming along this evening. Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you for your time.
No, thank
Now,
you, and I hope it's done what I intended to do. I hope everyone's just got a little bit more information, a little bit more awareness, a little bit more like, okay, that's where I need to go next. That's what this is designed to do, like just to spark. Yep, I need to do a bit more work here, or yes, that confirms what I'm doing, or just that sort of approach. So hopefully that's hit the nail for some people, and things like that. So yeah.
yeah, I hope so. And everyone should really get along and like Kevin on Facebook. And we'd really like to get to know you personally all as well. If you please email me at stephen@psychwebinars.com, like on the screen there, and we'd really like to get to know you all and what you need to learn and travel the journey with you to help you get what you need and improve resources in the country. So looks like we've got a couple of people commenting that they really think it was a really good webinar. It was an excellent presentation.
Well,
And
thank you.
so thank you, Rose and Jennifer and Kelly. Thank you all very, very much. And thank you very much, Kevin.
No, thanks,
And
Steve, for
thank
the
you
invite, and
to
look
the
forward to
rest
doing
of the
some more
people
work with
coming
you.
along. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, Kevin,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
cool. Cool.
Thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you all soon.
Talk to you soon,
See
mate.
ya.
Bye.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.